You're listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, episode number 37. Ask Jill, lead, breastfeeding toddlers, and milk allergy. I'm Jill Castle, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert and host of the Nourished Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of raising healthy ones, inside and out. Today, I'm taking a different twist on the podcast, and I am answering some listeners' questions. So today, we'll be talking about lead in baby food, as well as the breastfeeding toddler and milk recommendations for that population. And lastly, milk allergy and what would be a good milk substitute for those children who have a milk allergy. You can find today's show notes with all the links I mention over at jillcastle.com/037. That's 037 for episode number 37.
Welcome to the Nourished Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nourished Child Podcast. If this is your first time here, I'm sending out a big, huge welcome to you. I'm glad you're tuning in and I hope you like what you hear. And if you're a returning listener, thank you so much. I really appreciate your loyalty and your interest in this show. Today I'm answering some listeners' questions. It's so fun, honestly, to get little emails from people who actually like and listen to the show and who have questions based on what they've already heard. So I might have covered a topic and it might have posed a question for somebody in their mind. And I'm starting to get enough of them that I can corral a few of them into a show. And that's what I'm trying to do today. So if you are a listener and questions come up for you, don't hesitate to send your question to me at jill@jillcastle.com, or you can go over to the Facebook page called The Nourished Child. That's www.facebook.com/The Nourished Child. I'd love for you to join us over there. I talk about a lot of different things. It's not just the podcast. A lot of the blog posts that I write get shared there, as well as other interesting news clips, research, and just general topics and conversation about childhood nutrition. So if you do have questions you want me to answer on the show, again, email them to me or post them in a private message if you want to over on Facebook. I promise I won't use your full name. I will use your first name. Hopefully that's okay. But at this point, the listenership is so wide, I don't think anybody would ever be able to identify you. Today's show is sponsored by the Kids Healthy Weight Project, an e-course I developed to help parents like you nourish your child with food, feeding, and a lifestyle approach that encourages a healthy relationship with food, a healthy body, and healthy eating. That course is available over on my website, jillcastle.com/courses. I'd love to see you sign up for it. I think it is a wonderful value and service to families who might not have access to a pediatric dietitian or who might feel a little bit in the woods about whether they're feeding their child a healthy diet in a healthy way so that they are encouraging their child to grow up as healthy as they can be. So if you've ever wanted to get feedback or guidance or information about feeding your child, the Kids Healthy Weight Project is the perfect online course for you to take to make sure you're flexing your feeding muscle and you're hitting the highlights of all the nutritious options you can offer your child. The course covers everything from meals, food groups, healthy snacks, positive feeding, troubleshooting the challenges that come up like kids who snack too much to children who are picky and won't eat healthy food at all, as well as those healthy lifestyle habits you must have in place in order to raise a healthy child, which include adequate sleep, activity, and a whole host of other things. So check it out. You can find it on my website, jillcastle.com/courses, and you'll find the Kids Healthy Weight Project there. Okay, let's get into the topics at hand. The first topic I want to talk about is lead in baby food. Many of you might have heard or seen some of the media publications a couple of weeks ago that showcased a new report from the Environmental Defense Fund that said that 20% of baby foods sampled over a 10-year period had detectable levels of lead. So this sparked my interest because my fourth child had high lead levels when he was, I forget the time that they check it, but I think they check around age 1 and then they check again around age 2, and he had high lead in his blood. We lived in an antique home. He was crawling all over the place. He also had a propensity for taking apart and playing with the vacuum cleaner, and he was a thumb sucker. So he unfortunately got contaminated with lead, and we were able to correct it. And I don't think it had any ill effects on him, but it is quite a concern amongst parents of young children, pediatricians too, to make sure that babies are not getting lead in their diet or exposed to it in other methods or other environments. We don't know, according to this study from the Environmental Defense Fund, we don't know where the lead is getting into the baby food. So they're not certain if it's coming from the soil or if it's coming from manufacturing processes, but they are finding, or they did find rather, that 20% of baby foods had detectable levels of lead in them. The Environmental Defense Fund looked at FDA data from 2003 to 2013, and they sampled over 2,000 baby foods. What they found was about 89% of grape juice, 86% of sweet potatoes, and 47% of teething biscuits, among other foods, had detectable levels of lead in them. Individually, they stated that the levels of lead were rather low, but the concern is around the accumulation of different foods in a child's diet, adding up to a concerning level. The FDA has a set allowable level of lead. None of the baby foods tested exceeded this allowable lead level. But the FDA is presently reviewing its standards in this area, and concerned healthcare professionals are wondering if the current recommendations regarding lead, allowable levels of lead, may not be current. They may not be reflecting the current science. So we want to make sure, and I think the FDA and the public would like to make sure, that their current recommendations are reflective of the known science that we have. There's no safe level of lead for a growing child, period. I think we can all agree on that. The CDC states that 5 micrograms per deciliter of blood in children is considered high. So lead is detrimental to a child's brain development. It's detrimental to their IQ, their attention span, and their academic achievement potential. So the CDC also further goes on to say that lead exposure and its ill effects cannot be corrected. So what do we do with this information? Do we all stop feeding baby food to our babies? I'm not sure that's the answer. I think that taking a more commonsensical approach, make your own food if you can. If you are purchasing commercially prepared baby foods, make sure you're really working on a wide variety in your baby's diet. So don't feed the same baby foods over and over and over again. Really try to rotate all those different vegetables and fruits, and not only from teaching your baby how to learn to like a variety of different flavors, but also it protects them from potentially getting too much lead in their diet. We also know that food sources rich in iron, calcium, and vitamin C help limit the absorption of lead from the diet. So make sure you're offering foods that are rich in iron, like beef and other meats, calcium, vitamin C containing foods, such as milk for the calcium, or yogurt, and citrus juice or citrus fruit, tomatoes, red peppers for a source of vitamin C. You also want to make sure you're limiting the amount of fruit juice in your toddler's diet. If you have a baby, the recommendations currently are for no fruit juice in the first year of life. Beyond that, I think it's prudent to be careful with how much fruit juice you offer your over 1-year-old toddler. I know lead sounds very scary, and the prospect of your infant getting exposed to it is a scary prospect. So again, nutrition really matters in those first couple of years of life for a number of different things. So having this information is important, not to scare you, but to help you be aware of how things can interact and influence and impact your child early on. Okay, topic number 2. This is a question from a listener by the name of Jessie, and she is also a blog follower of mine, so I'm going to read what she has to say. Dear Jill, I've found your Fearless Feeding book super helpful and am interested in learning more about milk options for my toddler. As a mom of a frequently nursing toddler, I find it frustrating how little info is available that specifically addresses nutrition for breastfeeding toddlers. Please consider including more information about breast milk, nutritional needs of the nursing toddler in future milk comparisons and other posts. Despite the WHO recommendation to nurse until at least age 2, most sources of nutritional information seem to ignore the 1 to 2-year-olds who are still nursing. I've heard lots of other moms of nursing toddlers express confusion about the nutritional needs of their little ones regarding milk. So I know I'm not the only one who would appreciate this info. Jessie. All right, so Jessie, I want to answer and make sure I'm fairly complete in my answer of your question. And so I just want to say, first off, that for breastfeeding toddlers, number one, it is wonderful that you are still nursing your toddler. I think that's great. It's a wonderful way of bonding and connecting, passing along your immunity to your toddler. And that is really, really great. I also want to say, though, that in terms of nutrition, your toddler is really, at this point, relying on food mostly for his nutrition. So while he's getting a little bit from your breast milk, the lion's share of his nutrition should be coming from the food and the nutritious beverages he's drinking. In terms of selecting a milk option, the recommendations remain the same for your toddler or for any toddler who's breastfeeding, and that is the standard is a cow's milk, whole milk option. That is because cow's milk is rich in calcium and vitamin D, has a good amount of fat, because remember, toddlers are still requiring a rich source of fat in their diet because they're still growing pretty quickly, and that also helps their brain grow. There are other alternatives, as you probably know, such as soy milk, which is probably the most comparable milk alternative to cow's milk. And there's also the fortified alternative route, which are things like rice milk or nut milks. Those aren't ideal for the growing toddler because they tend to be very low in protein and in fat. So I tend to recommend first and foremost cow's milk, whole cow's milk for the first 2 years of life. And beyond that, if your toddler is allergic to milk, which I'm going to talk in the next question about, but if your toddler's allergic to milk or you're choosing to not offer cow's milk, then you want to definitely make sure you are choosing something that is rich in calcium and in vitamin D and has adequate fat and protein. In addition to recommendations, just general recommendations for the breastfeeding toddler, you still want to focus on introducing a wide variety of new flavors to your toddler's diet and really helping him or her self-feed. That's kind of a weird way to say it. You're not helping your toddler self-feed because self-feeding would indicate that there's no help from you, right? But you do want to be supporting your toddler in self-feeding and his independence and autonomy around eating. You also want to be making sure that your toddler's getting a wide variety of textures in his diet. So crunchy, smooth, wet, dry, lots of different textures and sensory components to food that your toddler should be exposed to. The diet should still be very nutrient rich. There's not a lot of room in a young toddler's diet for things like candy or sweets. Remember, their tummies are tiny, so the nutrition that they're getting really needs to pack a pretty strong nutrient punch to cover those needs during this super high rate of growth period. Because your toddler is nursing, you still want to help him or her master the cup. So sometimes the breastfeeding toddler isn't interested in drinking from a cup, so parents will jump to the bottle. I don't recommend that. I recommend if your baby or toddler is nursing that you try going directly to a cup, either with a straw or an open top cup with your assistance, but not to go the bottle route because that can be confusing and just really delay the progression to getting your toddler independent with a cup. In terms of how much milk per day for that child between 1 and 2 years of age, it's generally recommended that he have between 2 and 3 cups of milk per day. 3 is really the upper limit. I tend to recommend 2 8-ounce cups per day as the target. And then, of course, you're going to want to offer your toddler 3 balanced meals and 2 to 3 healthy snacks each day. Again, those meals and snacks should occur around every 2.5 to maybe 3 hours during the day. Your toddler will really be able to self-regulate his appetite, hopefully, but you want to set up that structure of meals and snacks because you want to offer food that frequently to match his requirements. So, Jessie, I hope that answers your questions about nursing your toddler. I think as a nursing mother, your primary focus should be on making sure that the solid foods and the nutritious beverages that he's drinking are just really nutrient rich. And the breastfeeding component part of it, while it will give a small amount of nutrition to your toddler, his needs at this juncture should, for the most part, be met by food. Hope that helps. Okay, I have another question here from a listener who has a 5-year-old with dairy and soy intolerances. So I'll read her question to you. This is from Jen. Hi, Jill. I just started listening to your podcasts, and on the one about snacking, I heard your call to action for ideas for future podcasts. I have a 5-year-old who has dairy and soy intolerances, consumption of which aggravates her eczema. As a foodie family, we try to find food alternatives that avoid the need for supplementation. While they do take a multi every day and a probiotic, I would love some discussion on ways to get sufficient calcium consumption through food, if possible, on a dairy-free diet. Almond and coconut milks that I use don't seem to have as much, although the coconut milk yogurts do pack a better punch. My kids are generally great at trying new foods, so open to all ideas. All right. Sincerely, Jen. Well, Jen, I do have a couple of ideas for you. Number one, I think it's wonderful that you are focused on making sure your children are getting all the nutrients they need in their daily diet, especially with a milk and soy intolerance or allergy. It becomes very important to make sure that when you take a food out or a group of foods, such as dairy, for example, that you understand what nutrients you're removing from the diet and you look for a substitute to replace those nutrients, which I think you've got that general gist down. You've got that general idea and you've been doing a really good job of doing that. The other thing I would say to you is that, when you're taking out cow's milk, the main nutrients we want to make sure get covered are calcium and vitamin D. And in some children, really paying attention to the protein replacement helps them as well, because they might not have great intake of protein from other sources in their diet. So as you know, calcium is big and vitamin D together. They're big for building bones. Your children will be building their bones up until about age 18, 19, or 20. The lion's share of their bones will be done by age 19. So calcium and vitamin D are really important. And yes, you can get them from other foods. In fact, I wrote a little nutrient guidebook called the Calcium Handbook to help parents understand all about calcium and what it does, but where they can get calcium from foods in their child's diet. And that book also covers where you can get calcium from a supplement, where you can get it from an alternative to dairy food source. So I would recommend, if you're interested in getting sort of the full range, the full gamut of calcium food sources and supplement sources and fortified foods, that you check out the Calcium Handbook. We know with vitamin D, children need 600 international units each day. And we also know that vitamin D is one of the hardest vitamins to meet with food alone. Many children need fortified foods like milk to meet and match their vitamin D requirements. And still, even other children will require a multivitamin supplement that includes vitamin D to ensure that they get enough. So you called out almond and coconut milks in terms of using those as a substitute. And I completely agree that almond, nut milks, and coconut milks don't have a ton of protein in them. And some of them have varying levels of calcium and vitamin D supplementation. There is a new product out a relatively new product out that might be of interest to you, and it's called Ripple, and it's made from pea protein. So the pea protein allows this milk and soy alternative to have a little bit more protein in the amount that's similar to cow's milk, as well as the fortification with calcium and vitamin D is very good. In fact, the calcium is 45% of the daily value, and the vitamin D is 30% of the daily value. So that's a really good source of calcium and vitamin D. Ripple also has a bit of iron in it. I think it's about 15% of the daily value. Another alternative that is a little bit better in my mind than almond and coconut milk is oat milk, and that has about half the amount of protein as cow's milk, and it is also supplemented with calcium and vitamin D above the level of 20% of the daily value. So oat milk and pea milk, or Ripple, which is the pea milk product, those are great alternatives to milk, cow's milk, and soy milk if your child is unable to tolerate those. Okay, folks, that's it for today. So fun for me to just answer questions and talk off the top of my head. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I'd love for you to support the show in any way that you can. You can visit the show on iTunes and write a review there. Your review helps other parents find the show and learn and gain more knowledge about nourishing a child. But if you had to do one thing, I guess I would ask you to come on over to Facebook. Most of you are probably already on Facebook. Come to Facebook and like The Nourished Child. You will be able to find it quite easily in the search bar on Facebook. Type in The Nourished Child with Jill Castle, and you can like that page there, and you'll continue to get updates about the podcast, updates about the blog, and also important and interesting nutrition tidbits for your child. As always, thanks for joining me today. I'm so glad you were here. Please don't forget to give that child in your life, big or small, a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.